currency and money, and you will hear me say currency, currency, currency over and over and over again. Back before World War I, each note that a treasury issued, each dollar in existence in the United States, would say that there have been deposited with the United States Treasury $20 in gold coin payable to the bearer upon demand. The money was in the vault. The currency was a note they gave you that was a claim check, only a claim check on the money, the same as if you go to the dry cleaners and you give them your shirt and they give you a claim check for your shirt. The value is that shirt at the dry cleaners, not the piece of paper that says that you own that shirt. So our currency that circulated was the paper US dollars, and they were claim checks on money. And people do not understand that money has to be a store of value. Only gold and silver qualify as money. They have all the attributes that you need. They're portable, durable, divisible, fungible, and then money is a store of value over long periods of time. One of the things that I always start with is how currency is created, because if you know how the world financial system works, you know the game that you're playing. And if you don't know the game and the rules that we're playing by, you're going to get slaughtered. You are going to get slaughtered. So this, just by knowing this, increases your odds just 100-fold of winning. When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover the check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money. And that is, putting it simply, from the Boston Federal Reserve's website. Basically, the way this works is, in the United States, it's the U.S. Treasury, but every country has the equivalent of our Treasury. So the treasuries around the world create a bond. And what is a bond? A bond is just an IOU. Loan me $1 trillion and I promise that over a 30-year period I'm going to pay you back $2 trillion. That's basically a bond, IOU. And there's something in the middle here called open market operations that I'm going to just show you real quickly, but the open market operations is just a shell game that obscures what is truly going on. So banks show up at the Treasury auctions, the primary dealers they're called, and then the Federal Reserve comes along, and through open market operations, they write a check to the bank and they buy that bond from the bank. So the Federal Reserve ends up with the bond. But then the next month, those banks show up at the Treasury auction again. Now the Treasury has the dollars and the Federal Reserve has the bond, and this process repeats itself over and over and over again, and there's a buildup of dollars at the Treasury and bonds at the Federal Reserve. So we borrow currency into existence with an IOU, that bond, and the Federal Reserve opens up their big old checkbook that doesn't have a single penny in it and writes a bad counterfeit check and hands that to the Treasury. Dollars spring into existence. Then the Treasury deposits that in the various branches of the government, and the government does some deficit spending on social programs, public works, and war. And then they pay those government workers, the contractors, and the soldiers, and all of those people deposit it in their private banks. Banks create money by monetizing the private debts of businesses and individuals. Federal Reserve Bank of New York. So, now the miracle of fractional reserve lending comes into play. Fractional reserve lending is just what it says. They reserve a fraction of what they've got. If you go into the bank and you deposit $100, the bank is allowed to keep $10 in your checking account in case you want some of that $100, and they get to steal $90 of it without telling you. Your checking account never has the balance that it says it's got in there. They have borrowed most of that currency out of there, and they're going to loan it to other people. When those people sign that loan, currency actually gets created because you have $100 on deposit, and they have 90, so now there's 190. Then they go and buy something. That's the reason they're taking out a loan. They're going to buy a house or a car or something like that. And when they buy that thing, the seller then deposits it in his bank account. So that $90 gets deposited, and then they get to go in and steal 90% of that, meaning $81. So now there's $271 on deposit. Can everybody see how the currency supply is getting magnified by the banks here? And that process happens over and over and over again, and under a 10% reserve ratio, every dollar deposited can create another 10. So if you deposit $1 trillion in base money, it can create 10 trillion. And that is basically it. There is nothing else. Our entire currency supply is either IOUs or receipts for IOUs. That's all that it is. It's all an imaginary agreement, and it is all given value because your experience yesterday is that a dollar purchased you something, so you expect that it's going to tomorrow. So you have this agreement that is basically, our entire currency system is imaginary. It doesn't really exist. It's just that we're all dreaming the same dream. If anybody chooses to wake up, it's over with. So it's really just a couple of bucks that is whipped up in this little voodoo hocus-pocus scheme here, where the Treasury and the Federal Reserve write out IOUs for each other. A check is an IOU, a bond is an IOU, and they swap IOUs, dollars spring into existence. A dollar is a receipt or a claim check on an IOU. Then the rest of the currency supply is a bunch of numbers that the banks type into their computers. They don't exist. In my book, I call things money until I get to the point where I define what money is and the difference between money and currency. And from that point forward, I only call gold and silver money, and I call everything else currency. But in the original manuscript, when I start talking about the massive currency creation that's going on and how banks are just debasing the currency supply all over the world and how this Mandrake mechanism works, I start referring to it as the number supply, the M3 number supply, the base number supply, because they're just numbers that somebody made up. I can write numbers on a Post-it and hand them out like this. They make them up. They type them in the computer. It is nothing but a supply of numbers. How many numbers are there? It's infinite. So it's nothing but a number supply. But it becomes real when you work for some of that currency supply, that number supply, and at that point, it now represents your blood, sweat, labor, ideas, and talent. You are what gives the currency supply value. It would have no value without you. And the way that that value is enforced, this is the really cruel joke here, is that you then save up a part of that currency supply so that you can pay tax to the tax collector in the United States, that's called the IRS, so that they can turn that over to the Treasury so the Treasury can pay the principal plus the interest on that bond, which was paid for with a check from nothing. So you can see that, right? Everybody sees how this works. Now, there's another joke. There was interest due on that bond. Let me ask you, if you borrow a dollar into existence, and that's the only dollar that exists on the entire planet, but you promise to pay back $2, where do you get the second dollar? Has anybody got the answer on that one? You have to borrow, well, you borrow it into existence. When people say that they're just printing money, they're wrong. First of all, they're printing currency, but they're borrowing currency into existence. The Fed doesn't just print money. What they do is they indebt us in the future. Every one of these loans that we took out at the bank that created the vast majority of our currency supply, 95% of our currency supply roughly, has been created by the banks. I think actually that's 93% now. and the Federal Reserve created about 7%. But before the financial crisis, the actual physical paper dollars are what the Federal Reserve and the Treasury creates. It's known as base, they call it base money, I call it base currency. And then we create the rest of the currency supply by going to the bank and borrowing for a home or something like that, or buying dinner and signing a credit card. When you sign that credit card receipt, you've expanded the currency supply of the planet. The problem with this system is that every single month there is a payment due on that bond for the principal plus the interest, and there's payments due on your home mortgages and on your cars and on your credit cards. Every single month you've got to make a payment on that currency that you borrowed into existence. And on the balance sheet, that payment extinguishes the currency that you borrowed into existence, so the currency supply starts to collapse. This system requires that we go deeper into debt every month than we were the previous month. We have to always borrow more currency into existence than we are extinguishing every single month, or the whole thing starts to collapse.